All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar about carbon-plated shoes. Do they really make you faster? So my name is Jean-François JF Esculier. I'm a physiotherapist at MoveMed Physiotherapy and I'm leader of research and development at the Running Clinic. And this webinar is presented in a partnership with the Interior Running Association. So it's a pleasure to talk about this topic. I get so many questions all the time about running shoes. What should I be wearing to improve my performance? So I decided to make this webinar, and hopefully you guys will be able to get some relevant information on the topic. So basically, just a little bit about myself. So I am a physiotherapist. I've been a physio for 15 years. I've been involved in the field of sports medicine since the beginning of my practice. And so I've been a clinician for 15 years, but I've also been involved in research quite a bit. I completed a master's, a PhD, and a postdoctoral fellowship about running and knee pain, especially. So knee osteoarthritis. I've also done some research on running footwear, running biomechanics. So basically the stuff that we're going to be talking about in this webinar. And I wear 3 different hats. So I am a clinician at MoveMed Physiotherapy here in Kelowna. I am also a researcher at the Running Clinic and at the University of British Columbia in the Department of Physical Therapy. And I also teach in those for those 2 different organizations, the Running Clinic and UBC. Just a quick note about MoveMed Physiotherapy, because we're involved with the IRA, the Interior Running Association, as a community sponsor. So we do specialize in running, and if you do have any sort of niggles or pain or injury related to running, or not even to running, but other injuries, we're happy to help, even if you are located not in Kelowna, but somewhere else in BC, in the interior. If you're watching this from Kamloops or somewhere else, feel free to reach out. We also do virtual consults with our expertise in running. So let's get started with this content here. And just to let you know, this topic can get a bit emotional because some people say, for me, I know it improved my performance. So I have clear examples, et cetera, and they're end of ones, meaning there are case studies, and for them it helps, and that's great. So what I decided to do here, because I cannot really argue against those things, I decided to go get the scientific arguments and basically the facts that we know for now in terms of the research on carbon-plated running shoes. So just to introduce the concept, this is the first model that was made available in terms of carbon-plated shoe. The one that you see is called the Nike Vaporfly 4%. And we'll see later in this presentation, it's based on a study that was published saying that you can improve your running economy by 4% if you run with those. So running economy is a concept where it's the same as the fuel economy in your car. It's how much energy you're spending when you're moving. So how many liters per 100 kilometers in your car. With running shoes, we're talking about the oxygen consumption typically, or the energy consumption that you're using. So that was the first generation. And then the second one, then came the Vaporfly Next %. And then the Nike Alpha Fly. So they've had different iterations of the same concept, with achieving the same goal over the years. So there's typically one new model every year. And those shoes, they range, just to give you an idea of cost, if you're wondering, between 300 Canadian dollars and close to 400 Canadian dollars for the Alpha Fly on the right side. And then came other models like the Adidas Pro Evo 1, which was launched at the very low price of $500 US. So if you're living in Canada, let's just say 650 Canadian dollars. So it's a bit expensive. And the worst part is it is marketed as a single-use carbon-plated racing shoe, which is a bit of nonsense to me, but this is how it's marketed. And believe it or not, when they launched it, it was sold out in a matter of one day. So people are looking for those products. But it's not the end of the innovation or the models that came out. We also have quite recently, this model by Li-Ning, who is that's a Chinese running shoe company, who got this model called the Dragonflight. And if you look carefully, like, it's not a glitch that you see there. That's how the shoe is built. And that sells for a very low price of $1,000. So the question is, these shoes, where they incorporate these carbon plates in them and other technologies, a lot of technologies, do they really help with performance? And the technologies, obviously, you'll have that carbon plate in there, but you also have the stiffness, the teeter-totter effect that the shoe will have, so kind of the rounded base of the shoe, the type of foam that they incorporate, the aerodynamics, et cetera, et cetera. So there are countless new technologies that are promoted by companies to try and promote these beneficial effects on performance. And you'll see at the bottom of the slide, the weight is, I would say, the biggest one in there, probably the most important factor for performance. And that's what we'll explore first. What is the influence of the shoe weight on performance? I'll say back in the day, but it's not that long ago, prior to 2017, prior to the first models of carbon-plated shoes, we had performance shoes that were typically racing flats. Like this one, the New Balance 5000, the weight of that shoe was pretty much 100 grams, so very, very light. And that shoe was being worn in competitions to obviously make you run faster. The typical training shoe during those years would weigh around 300 grams and sometimes got up to, even in this case, the New Balance 1122, over 450 grams. So a very heavy, a massive shoe. And then you compared at that time of the New Balance 1122, the racing shoe that was more common, this Adidas Adios shoe, was weighing around 200 grams. So still, like, the gap here is that you would be training with that heavy shoe and you would be competing with a light shoe. So a lot of marathons have been run by the elites with that Adidas shoe that you see there. That's about 200 grams. Since 2017, the new generation of shoes looks like this, the shoes that we've seen so far in this presentation. And they compare in terms of the thickness to the training shoes that you see on the left side. But the advantage that they have is that they make them very light. So in this case, the Nike Vaporfly shoe, around 200 grams for the first generation. Now you look over the years what the elites have been wearing. So Haile Gebrselassie, when he set his world record on marathon in 2008, he ran 2 hours, 3 minutes and 59 seconds. He was wearing the Adidas Adizero Adios 2, which is a 230 gram shoe made of, the midsole was made of EVA. So that's ethyl vinyl acetate, the typical material for that generation, and even now today, that's the typical material. And in 2014, and I should say, like, the typical training shoe during that time was this one, 330 grams, the Supernova Glide. In 2014, Dennis Kimetto lowered the time to 2:02:57. That was the new world record then. And the shoes were barely lighter, so 224 grams, but pretty much the same. And the training shoes were also very, very similar. The difference here is the Adidas shoe, they changed the material of the midsole a bit. So they incorporated thermoplastic polyurethane, TPU, as a combination with the EVA. in the hope that it could help with performance. So the TPU had a better energy return than the EVA. 2016, so the shoes looked pretty much the same. Adidas continued with that same kind of approach of combining EVA and TPU, heavier shoe for training. And Nike decided to change things up a little bit and was able to get a shoe that would be lighter, so under 200 grams, the Nike Zoom Streak 6 that was worn by Eliud Kipchoge here. And the typical training shoe would be a Pegasus 300 grams. So the weight went down a little bit prior to those new generations of shoes. Now, what I want to present here is just some studies about the effects of shoe weight on performance. This article here, called "The Effect of Footwear on Running Performance and Running Economy in Distance Runners," is what we call a systematic review. So it reviewed the scientific literature on the topic, and they included 19 different studies that looked at 243 distance runners who were adapted to traditional running shoes. They compared the different shoes and their features, and they were mostly interested in the effect of the shoe on running economy. What they found out was that heavier shoes increased the metabolic cost of running. It seemed to be a pretty clear relationship based on the current state of research. That was in 2015. A few years later, 2020, a big literature review done by a group from Calgary, including Dr. Benonig, who's probably the biggest name in footwear research in the past 50 years. So they looked at 20 different features of the running shoes, and they tried to classify runners in 3 different levels. So the novice runners, the recreational runners, and the high caliber or elite runners. And their conclusion was that regardless of the level of the runner, the shoe should be as light as possible in order to perform the best way possible. So basically, since 2020, there's nothing new really on the weight. This is the most determining factor for performance. So what we know now is that heavier shoes increase the oxygen consumption when you run. That's pretty clear from all the research that we have. And it is the most important criterion on performance, even if other features also have some effect. So cushioning can have an effect, flexibility of the shoe. So having a bit of stiffness in the sole might be beneficial, but the weight is the top factor for performance. And the influence of weight is such that every 100 grams added at the foot level increases the energy cost of running by about 1%. So somewhere between 0.7 and 1.4%. So that's a big difference. Like every 100 grams is 1% of oxygen consumption. And it seems like every 1% of reduction of the cost of running translates into approximately 0.78, or let's say 0.8% of improvement in performance. That's for recreational runners. If you're an elite runner, it's more about 0.6% improvement in performance. So based on all of that, we can see that there's a clear effect of the weight of the shoe on performance. And interestingly, the faster you run, the greater that effect will be. So especially if you're racing and you're running faster, so you're at your race pace, the weight of the shoe will have a massive influence. Well, I say massive, it means even 1% can be considered massive if you've been training, and just having that shoe can make a big difference. The other thing that's quite important to know is that what you're used to, your habits in terms of footwear, will also influence performance. And simply because if you're racing with something that you're used to, or close to the shoes that you're used to in terms of what the new shoes look like or your racing shoes look like, you will be more economical because you're more comfortable in that kind of shoe. So the perceived comfort seems to be an important factor related to performance. Interestingly, pretty much all the studies are done on runners who are used to thicker shoes, more maximalist or traditional footwear. We don't really have studies that look at, say, runners who are running with more minimalist shoes or barefoot runners and their effect, the effect of those shoes on their performance. So they're all people who are used to more cushioned shoes, and as we'll see later, they might very well see an improvement of performance, but not necessarily. So how much of an improvement is that? Well, we have, I'm sure, all kinds of runners watching this webinar right now. What we know is lighter shoes will save you some time on your race. Imagine the median time for marathon is 4 hours and 30 minutes, typically. The median time meaning if there's 1,000 people running the marathon, the 500th person at the finish line will be around 4 hours and 30 minutes. So in this case, if this person is used to a shoe that's 350 grams, and that's 270 minutes, their time, 4 hours and 30 minutes, that's 16,200 seconds. If they get used to a shoe that's 100 grams in terms of weight, they can run 4:22:38. That is a difference of 7 minutes and 22 seconds if we use the formula that we just looked at in terms of the improvement of oxygen consumption versus performance. Like obviously, if you're not used to that shoe that's 100 gram and you're not comfortable in it, this is not going to happen. But if the shoe looks like what you're training with usually, you're comfortable in it, it's very light, chances are that you will be improving your times. Okay, so the influence of the shoe weight is really, really high in terms of time trial or race time. Now, obviously, if your marathon time is 2 hours and 30 minutes, and you're usually training with shoes that are 250 grams and you go to a shoe that's 100, then it won't be 7 minutes. Like it might be around maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes. It's still an important difference. Okay, so looking at the research on those shoes, the different kind of shoes and the first generation of the carbon-plated shoes. So this first study that came out here is the one that kind of started the whole thing in terms of the carbon-plated shoe research. So they looked at that Nike prototype on the right side, which was the Vaporfly, right? So 31 millimeters of cushioning, 10 millimeters of drop, and the shoe was 199 grams. It has a carbon plate. It has a type of foam called PEBA. So we'll see that later, what it means and what that is. And that kind of foam has 87% energy return. So it tends to be more compliant than the other two shoes that were compared, being the Nike Zoom Streak 6, that is 203 grams, and the Adidas Boost 2, 250 grams. So what they did here is they said, well, we don't want the weight to be the determining factor. So let's add extra weight to the two lighter shoes, so the two on the sides, because the Adidas shoe in the middle was heavier and it was used to race a lot of marathons at the time. So they're like, let's add some weight and then compare the running, the cost of running or the energy expenditure for the three shoes. And what they found was that the shoe on the right, the Nike Vaporfly, sorry, yielded a 4% average energetic saving compared to the others, which should translate, that's the conclusion from the authors, should translate to 3.4% improvement in running velocity at marathon world record pace, which is kind of optimistic given the formula that we just looked at, which technically should be more closer to 2.4% in elite athletes. But It is a well-conducted study. The only problem is that funding was obtained from Nike for that study, and there's a conflict of interest declared by some of the authors. They're paid consultants or employees of Nike. So obviously this study came out, and they were talking about the 4% improvement. Therefore, they named the first generation of carbon-plated shoes, in this case, the newer generations, the Nike Vaporfly 4%. That's where it came from. So is the carbon plate really responsible for the improvement? That is, I guess, the main question, right? Because if you go to a store, you're looking for performance shoes, most of them now will have that carbon plate in them, selling at high price, as we saw earlier. And the question is, do they really work? So this study here, quite interesting, in 2021, they did a randomized controlled trial, which is assigning people to the different shoes in a random order in 15 healthy runners. They were male runners, and they had two shoes, two Vaporfly shoes. One of them had an intact carbon plate. The other one had a cut carbon plate at different locations. So basically, the action of the carbon plate, it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, being transmitting the force and helping with the rebound. So in this case, what they found, based on measures of running economy and running biomechanics at 14 kilometers an hour, both on the treadmill and over ground, is actually no difference in running economy between the carbon plate that was intact and the carbon plate that was cut in multiple places, which basically suggests that the carbon plate may not be the determining factor for running economy that some studies suggest. They also found a biomechanical difference, and that's simply because the carbon plate was cut in one of the shoe, meaning that in the cut shoe, people were reaching a greater amount of big toe extension simply because the shoe was not as stiff. So they observed a biomechanical effect of the carbon plate, being it's a stiffer shoe, but that did not translate in better running economy. That's kind of the conclusion that we get from that. If we look at the different materials from the sole, we have four main types typically that are out there on the market. Number one, the most common, is the EVA, the ethylene vinyl acetate, which is relatively light in terms of weight. But the compliance is more in the medium moderate kind of range. Same with the resilience, and the durability is considered medium. So quite interesting durability. You compare that with polyurethane, that tends to be heavier in terms of the weight, has a lower compliance, low resilience, but a high durability. So always depends what you're after. But that shoe might last for longer. Then there's the thermoplastic polyurethane, or expanded in some cases. So quite light, has a similar compliance to the EVA, but a better resilience, so better energy return, and the durability is quite similar. And finally, we have that latest generation of foam, the PEBA, the polyether block amide, which is very light in terms of the weight, has a high compliance, high energy return, and has a low durability. So obviously, if your goal, and we'll get back to that, but if your goal is to sell more shoes, then you're quite interested in the approach of the low durability, if that can help people perform better, but they need to buy more of those shoes. So how does that translate to the energy return? How much energy return is that providing, comparing the TPU and the PEBA? So the TPU would have, say, about 3.6 joules of energy return. PEBA is double, 7.5. But that amount, if you compare it with, say, your Achilles tendon when you're running, is still minimal. Like the amount of recoil or energy return that you get from your Achilles tendon is about 42 joules, and from the leg overall is 140. So that difference of 3 or 4 joules is not that impressive in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so just something to keep in mind when you're looking at the shoes and how much they maybe help with performance. And because of that, we can question, are those newer shoes, are they actually that effective at improving performance? So our research group with the running clinic, we conducted a study where we randomized 18 male runners who were running their 5K between 20 and 25 minutes. So they're not elite, they're considered more recreational, but not too slow recreational runners. And the goal of assessing that population is that's probably the mass market that is looking for those shoes that can help with performance. So we had them come into the lab for 4 different visits, and we looked at their VO2, so how much oxygen they're using when they're running, their VO2 max, and we looked at the comfort in 2 different shoes, running economy, running on the treadmill, and we had them do a time trial as well. So they had 2 different shoes, the Nike Vaporfly, the 4%, so the first generation. They also had a Saucony Endorphin Racer. That's the model, the Endorphin, that was prior to the Endorphin having a carbon plate. So that's more minimalist shoe, very, very light. So 153 grams versus the Vaporfly 211 grams versus their own shoes that were on average 313 grams. But what we did is we spray painted the shoes in black because we didn't want people to recognize the carbon plated shoes because they were quite new on the market. We did that study in 2018 or 2019. I'm forgetting the exact year, but they're quite new. So a lot of runners knew about them. That's why we spray painted them, to avoid influencing the perceptions and maybe the results. So looking at those 3 different types of shoes with the treadmill tests, we found that the running economy versus their normal shoes was better with the Vaporflies, between 3.6 and 4.5%, which fits with the 4% that we talked about earlier. But interestingly, the running economy was also improved with the minimalist shoe at 150 grams, between 2.4 and 4%. And that there was no significant difference between the Vaporfly and the Saucony Endorphin. So you can think with that, well, okay, then what's the point? Well, there was one interesting finding is people felt way less comfortable in the Saucony Endorphin, the very thin shoe, because they were not used to it. They're used to more maximalist, more cushioned shoes. And that's what was reflected on the time trial that we did, where we asked people to cover 3 kilometers as fast as they could. And the average speed for the Vaporfly was 16.3 kilometers an hour, and with the Saucony Endorphin was 16. And that was a significant difference between the 2 shoes. So basically, you can probably get a similar or almost similar improvement of running economy between the 2 shoes, but because you feel more comfortable with the carbon plated shoe, because it looks like what you usually use for running, then it makes you faster. Okay? So I hope it makes sense. And there have been a lot of different studies done over the years, and the purpose of this webinar is to give you kind of an overview of where we're at. I won't talk about every single study on the topic, but this study here was quite interesting, where they had world-class Kenyan and European amateur male runners. And they tested only 14 of them, so 7 world-class Kenyans and 7 well-trained European amateurs. And they looked at submaximal effort, what they were using in terms of oxygen consumption between a traditional competition shoe, 197 grams, and you see there's an Adidas logo because the study was conducted by Adidas employees. And you had on the other side 3 different shoe technologies implemented in the shoe. So you had a carbon plate, you had the higher cushioning, and you had and the weight was pretty similar to the other control shoe. What they found is, and I think this one is quite surprising, and it's kind of eye-opening, a lot of variability between individuals, especially for the elites. And it ranged from as much as an 11% deterioration to an 11% improvement. And that, to me, when I read that initially, I was like, oh, this is really interesting, because we keep talking about the people who may benefit and feel more and be more economical with the new shoes. But actually, there might also be people who are less economical with the carbon-plated shoes. And interestingly, overall, they found no effect on the Kenyan runners, but in the amateur European male runners, they found a relatively important, they said not statistically significant effect, simply because they didn't have enough people in their study, but the effect was there in those people, but not on the Kenyans. So the main take-home message from that is, well, it doesn't mean that you're going to improve. You might actually be worse. And they also did a literature review at the same time in that same study, and they concluded with a great inter-individual variability in terms of running economy. So that's the +11 to ±. The faster you run, the more pronounced the effect, whether it's detrimental or improvement. Maybe recreational runners can benefit more than the elites, and there potentially is a statistically significant average improvement in running economy. And that's obviously comparing the carbon-plated shoes with the classic traditional running shoe, not with the lighter minimalist that we just talked about in the previous study. Okay? So, in summary, where are we at on this topic just before we look at, well, what's happening in the field? Are times getting faster or are they not? So there is currently insufficient evidence to say that those carbon-plated shoes actually make a massive difference in terms of performance. The average effect on running economy and performance is closer to the 1% than it is to the 4%. And that's valid for runners who are used to maximalist footwear, and probably less so for hills, but it's more on flat courses. What we observe is there is a lot of variability, and you might benefit from them, but you might also be amongst those who might have a detrimental effect. So maybe 30 to 50% of runners for whom it may deteriorate performance. And there are a lot of factors that predict the effect. So obviously the level of the runner, their habits, what are they used to? Do they believe that those shoes will help them or not? And what kind of distances they run. So maybe if you believe in them, use for longer distances rather than short, maybe you have a better benefit. But there's a lot of buts, right? It's not that clear. What is clear is the number one advantage of those new shoes is that they're light and they're cushioned to the extent that the runner feels comfortable in them and is able to push a bit more. So being light is key for performance. Being comfortable is key to be able to push. and that's probably the main factor for performance. And the type of foam, the PEBA foam, has an advantageous effect. But the effect does not come from the carbon plate. And this might surprise a lot of people watching this webinar, but that's pretty much the consensus right now in the scientific community, is that the carbon plate is not the determining factor for performance. Maybe more the PEBA foam and its elastic properties, but certainly the weight of the shoe and potentially the placebo effect of the shoe. I won't dive too deep in terms of the placebo effect. What I'll say is just that we are currently, our research group is investigating some of that effect and see how that's potentially relevant in those shoes. And if it helps, it helps. That's great. I'm not against placebo effect. It's more about trying to find out why these shoes make people feel faster, because a lot of people report feeling faster with those carbon-plated shoes. And belief in their efficacy is widespread, and it's quite deep-rooted in the running community. I've had messages of people saying, how come you hate carbon-plated shoes? They really help. Everyone says it helps them. I mean, great, why not? I'm more about, can we get actual good proofs, scientific proofs that they can benefit people? It's not that clear. Okay, the problem is people don't have access to a lab. They don't go and test the shoes in the lab, and they're ready to pay a pretty high price tag for those shoes without even knowing if they'll benefit or if they're going to be detrimental. Okay, if you look at the trend of the world records, because some people say, well, world records are improving, so they have to work. Well, the evolution of the records follows a logarithmic curve, which means it's been improving for a lot of years. And typically, spontaneous improvements or in shorter periods of time will come from exceptional athletes. And that graph is for the 5,000 meters male records. And what we can see here is Haile Gebrselassie, who ran 12:39 in 1998, quite fast. 6 years later, Kenenisa Bekele ran 2 seconds faster, and it took 16 years for Joshua Cheptegei to remove another 2 seconds in 2020. So records are always improving, and that's because we're having great athletes every now and then that will beat those records, right? If you look at the female world marathon record, so you see kind of a similar trend here, and in this case, so Ingrid Christensen from Norway ran 2:24 in 1985, and it took 13 years for her record to be broken by Paula Radcliffe in 2003. She did 2:15, so that's a huge improvement, 9 minutes less. And that record lasted for 16 years. And after Paula Radcliffe, we had 2019, 2023, 2024, we had 3 women who broke that record. So Bridget Koskei removed 1 minute 29 from the time of Paula Radcliffe. Tigist Asefa in 2023 removed slightly more than 2 minutes from the record. And more recently in Chicago, Ruth Chepengetish removed almost 2 minutes again and became the first ever female marathon runner to go just under the 2 hour and 10 mark, which is very impressive. But we see those athletes perform really well. And we can wonder, is it really the shoes, right? So there are many different factors involved in performance. We tend to assume, oh, it's because of the shoes. Is it because of the shoes? This scientific article here, quite interesting. It's more an opinion piece, but it's from the leading expert in technological doping issues in the world, Bryce Dyer, who looked at basically using a 10-point questionnaire about the shoes and used formulas and all sorts of things to conclude that the performance improvements since the introduction of those shoes have not been greater than before their introduction. So you cannot say that all of a sudden people run faster because of the shoes. It's an opinion piece, but it's quite interesting. Now, if we look at the data, what is the data saying? Well, this study here came out in 2023, and they looked at the impact of those advanced footwear technology on elite men's time in road racing performance. So 1,500 data points. They looked at the top 100 male times on 10K, half marathon, and full marathon between 2015 and 2019. And they looked at who was wearing carbon-plated shoes or other footwear. So they looked at a bunch of videos, and they classified the different shoes into carbon-plated or not. And this is the kind of graph that they present for the different years. 2015, the whole bar there is, it's all non-carbon plated shoes because they did not exist yet. 2016, you had a couple of people with prototypes, but not very common. 2017, that's the gray at the top, you're getting more and more in 2018 and more in 2019. And what you see here, that line is simply the improvement in the times, which they calculated in terms of percentages. So faster time in the carbon-plated shoes by 0.83% on the 10K, 0.5% on the half marathon, and pretty much 1% on the full marathon. So it's not the 4%, but there seems to be a slight improvement related to maybe using the shoes. I say maybe because there's so many different factors involved. And then if you look at some of those runners in that study, they found runners who competed in the same year with carbon-plated shoes and without carbon-plated shoes. And they tried to see, well, for that runner, which we think the conditions are relatively stable, were they faster with the carbon-plated shoes or not? In this case, it was just about the same kind of improvement, so 0.76% faster over a half marathon, 1.22% faster over a full marathon. So those who did both conditions seem to be slightly faster with the carbon-plated shoes. And 25% of them have not witnessed a change in performance. So some of them improved, but not necessarily everyone improved. Okay, and we can go on and on and on about the progression, the evolution of the different times on the different distances, but I hope this gives you an overview of where we're at. So why are times getting better? Well, on the track and on the road, there's better pacing, better drafting. On the track, there's the wave light technology since 2018. You have the world record pace on the lights on the side of the track, and it gives you just constant feedback and motivation to follow that pace or beat it, right? So that's important psychologically. In road races, better drafting. There are a lot of different things that can be involved. The track technologies, they tend to be more resilient, more compliant. For example, at the Tokyo Olympics. Increased presence of East African runners, especially in road races. So they can travel a bit more, they got more sponsors, they can travel abroad, and they just run so fast that there's competition between those runners to get better and better all the time. And you can see a trend also for records to be beat for the previous year, the year prior to the marathon, which is the Olympic qualification year, or on the track events the same year as the Olympics. So again, psychological motivation. There are potentially other factors. I mean, we can't ignore the doping component. There's always something new in the field. but there was no competition, no testing during competition or out of competition during the pandemic time. Quite a few world records were also improved during that time. Better knowledge, better support for the athletes, better recovery, nutrition, sports psychology, all of that stuff has been improving, and the popularity of road racing. The prize money increases and motivates people as well to push harder. It's like if you beat the world record at the Valencia Marathon, you get $1 million. No one has done it, but that's certainly a motivation to try and perform, right? So in summary, where are we at? Well, world records keep being beaten because it just happens, but they follow a normal progression. We don't know for sure if the carbon-plated shoes have contributed to that progression, and if so, why. It's one piece of the puzzle. Overall, times are getting faster. The effect is small. We're talking about less than 1% on average, maybe around 1% on the marathon, but definitely the weight of the shoe is a key factor, and the placebo effect, most likely. So the shoe is only one piece of the puzzle. That's not what's gonna make you absolutely break your personal best, but it is potentially involved. And to me, I like to question that trend a little bit, just being a bit critical of the marketing that comes with it. But to me, it's the same. Like as if you were signing up for a marathon, and you know these options, you tick boxes for, you want a t-shirt, you want a medal, you want this and that. Imagine you had a box that said, tick this box if you'd like the race director to lower your race time by 1%. This option will add $1 per kilometer to your registration costs. How likely are you to tick that box? Because technically, if you buy that shoe for, say, $350, it, according to the company, it is good for 350 kilometers or so, which corresponds to $1 per kilometer. So how much are you willing to pay that extra amount in order to shave off some time from your registration costs? It's just a philosophical question that I find interesting. So I hope you enjoyed this webinar and learned a thing or two, and you can make your own decision, obviously, as to the shoes you want to wear for beating your personal best. I'll like to take some questions if there are any questions. Just remember to look for the race schedule for the Interior Running Association for next year, the road series and the cross-country series in the fall. And if you have a running injury, you're hoping to look at how you run, preventing injuries, improving performance, feel free to reach out to MoveMed Physiotherapy. I just put the booking link here, online booking, and we'll be happy to help you out. So thanks to the Interior Running Association for helping to organize this webinar, and thank you for attending, and I'll gladly take some questions, if any. Okay, so first question, the return of 7.5 joules compared to the other shoe of 3.5 doesn't seem that much different from one step. How would that add up over the course of a marathon? That's a great question, because again, if you look at the whole leg, that was 140 joules. The Achilles tendon itself is about, like the calf and the Achilles is about 70, 75 joules. So when you look at the difference of 3 or 4 joules, is that a difference? It is a difference, yes. But if you compare how much energy return you would get from say, reducing the thickness of your shoe and having more bounce from your Achilles because you're losing less, you're directly on the ground, I wonder how much you're actually gaining. So that difference of 4 between the EVA and not the EVA, the TPU and the PEBA foam, I think it makes a difference. But the difference, if you would compare that to a more minimalist shoe, which might give you more energy return from your calf, I'm not sure if it makes that much of a difference. So between the different materials, yes, I don't know how much that would add up to over the course of a marathon, but it's most likely an interesting effect if you compare the TPU or EVA and the PEBA foam. Next question, have they identified what factors other than elite or non-elite that influence if you respond to super shoes? Actually, no, not that I'm aware. Other than the speed, your habits, so what you're used to, those are definitely important factors. Some people have tried to see if the biomechanics would also influence, so the way you run. Some people say that rear foot strikers may benefit a bit more. If you tend to land on the forefoot or midfoot, maybe not as much. Which means that maybe road runners can benefit more, track runners not as much. And that's probably why a lot of the track shoes, like even if some of them have incorporated carbon plated shoes, they stayed very light and very thin overall. So biomechanics, maybe, but most likely, the habits of the person. I would be curious to have a study that looks at some elite runners from Kenya or Ethiopia or Uganda who are used to running barefoot. How would they respond to wearing those super shoes? My guess is that they would be less economical than when they're actually running barefoot or running with more minimalist shoes. But hopefully we get more answers to that in the future. Next question, would you recommend doing workouts in regular shoes or super shoes? Given that on race day, you'll be doing that pace in super shoes, so it would make sense to always do your fast workouts in them? Or is it better to train in slower shoes to get stronger? Great question. I think in order to perform the best way you can on race day, you need to train with the shoes you'll be racing with. So for that reason, I would say if your goal is to race with those carbon plated shoes, then I would say you should most likely train with them. You can do your speed intervals with them. Ideally, you would do your long runs with them, your race pace stuff. You would do that with those shoes to make sure you adapt really well to them and you feel comfortable performing with them. So that's typically my recommendation. The only problem is that they wear out so fast that most people don't even want to wear them in training at all because they'll need to change them sooner and it's a lot of money involved. So it's tricky, but in an ideal world, you would train more with the shoes you'll be competing with. So next question, if footwear is not the most convincing factor to improve performance based on the science, what should runners focus on if you want to improve running performance? That's such a great question because we tend to focus a lot on the shoes, but like you said, it's not the main factor at all. So what you should master, well, first of all, not being injured is key. So if you're injured, you can't perform well, you can't run fast. So you want to stay healthy. And that usually comes with having the right training program, the right balance between load and capacity. How much are you loading your tissues? How much are you able to adapt to that load? That's, to me, the number one factor. Then, if you consider yourself healthy and uninjured, you want to maximize the efficacy of your interval training sessions. So you want to do like faster workouts in order to be more comfortable at faster pace and also to improve your VO2 max and improve your running economy at faster speed. And then there's a bunch of other things like strength training. There's even studies that look at the effects of a consistent strength training. Imagine you're going to the gym lifting heavy 2 times a week for 12 to 16 weeks, so 3 to 4 months. Well, you get on average in recreational runners an improvement in performance by about 3 to 5%, which is a lot, right? So If you want the lower cost option and the best option for your health, I would say go and lift heavy weights. It is definitely going to provide you with some really interesting improvements in performance. Then there's a bunch of other stuff like sleeping well, recovering well. But those are kind of the key concepts in terms of performance. Okay, so questions keep coming in. I like it. Have you heard of carbon plates being used as a stabilizer for all the extra foam added to a super shoe? So instead of advertising it as a plate that provides some recoil, they advertise it as providing more stability because the shoes are so high now. I love this question because initially the marketing was, well, the carbon plate actually helps with performance. Then we found out that no, it doesn't. So let's find another justification for having it there. And it's true, those shoes are so thick and can become unstable. So is it a factor for stability? Maybe. I haven't seen any study on that specifically. But some people say, well, it's not just the foam. Maybe the carbon plate doesn't do much, but it's the interaction between the foam and the carbon plate. I mean, we can hypothesize as much as we want. The bottom line is there could be an effect that could be positive, or it can also be detrimental in some people to have that carbon plate and that high stack shoe with the foam. So whether we want to find a use for the carbon plate, that's up to the marketing teams, I think, but I'm not convinced by that. Someone says, thanks for all the research and info. You are welcome. Thanks for attending. Oh, questions keep coming. Let's keep going. How is running economy measured in studies that compare different shoes? If one shoe has better running economy, does it always lead to better times, faster speeds? Great question. So how is it measured? Usually it's with the gas exchange machine. So you have kind of ideally like a direct measurement with the oxygen consumption. And then you're able to know how much energy you're spending, how much oxygen you're using when you are running. That's the typical way of measuring that. And if one shoe has better running economy, does it always lead to better times, faster speed? No, not necessarily. So I was kind of alluding to that when I was mentioning the more minimalist shoe that was providing better running economy, but because it felt less comfortable to people, not as close to their usual habits, they were not performing as much or running as fast. So technically, it should. If you're comfortable with it, it should, but it does not always do it based on comfort. Next question. Does the added foam reduce stress on the body? Is it easier to recover after working out in a carbon PEBA shoe versus a minimalist shoe? Such a great question too, and I didn't explore that in here, but there's so much research on the effects of the cushioning of the shoe on the loads on your body, the stress on your body. So if you have thicker shoes, so you have say more cushioning under your foot, you will typically reduce the stress on your foot, but you'll increase that stress on your knee, on your hip, on your low back, on your pelvis. So it's not true to think that if you have more cushioning, you will reduce the stress on your body. If you wear more minimalist shoes, you will increase the load on your foot, your Achilles tendon, and your calf muscle, but you'll decrease the load, on the knee, the hip, the low back, and the pelvis. So is it easier to recover after working out? It depends on your habits. If you're always running with thicker shoes, more maximalist shoes, then if you run with the carbon plated shoes and the PEBA foams, some people say, I recover a bit faster. Maybe that's a perception. But if you're used to running in minimalist shoes and all of a sudden you run with that, I don't think you'll recover faster. So habits is usually the best predictor of how fast you're going to recover. It's the same if, I don't know, you're not doing any hills during the winter and you go back in the spring and all of a sudden you do a bunch of hill repeats. You will obviously be sore for a few days. But then as you get used to doing your hill sessions, you will be more comfortable with them and you will recover faster from those sessions. So again, habits, what is your body used to tolerate, and where do you go from there? Next question, if it's the foam rather than the carbon plate that makes the shoe fast, what is the rationale behind the super spikes since the amount of foam in them is so minimal? Well, that's a question that I'm asking myself too, because initially the rationale was the carbon plate. But if you look at the track times, the improvement follows, it seems like it's following the same trend as the road running shoes, which have a lot of potential confounders or variables involved. So that could be linked with training, it could be linked with just the athlete side of thing, the better training and all that stuff. It can also be, like I said, the light system on the track. It can be so many different things. The compliance of the track that might change from one track to the other. But it's not as convincing that the super spikes would have such a beneficial effect. So the rationale, again, here seems to be the carbon plate, but it doesn't seem to be the main factor, especially, like I said earlier, because the rear foot strikers tend to benefit a bit more, and you don't see that as much on the track. Next question, in your personal experience, what changes or trends have you seen in the types of running injuries being reported by your patients before and after the introduction of carbon shoes to the market? That's a tough one, because what's hard is most people don't train in them and they just race in them. And they race in them and they go fast, and then let's say they're sore after their race, and you could think it's because of the shoe, but you could also think, well, it's because they ran faster, it's because they pushed harder, it's because of this and that and that. So it's really hard to isolate because people don't wear them consistently for training. They wear them for racing, they wear them for like very few sessions. So it makes it hard to observe. In terms of the research, there's really only one article that I'm aware of that reports 5 cases of foot stress fractures with the carbon plated shoes, but it's one study. It's very small, it's retrospective, lots of confounding factors. So I wouldn't really conclude based on that. So I'm afraid I don't have a clear answer for your question, but if people were training with them more, I think we would see, we'd have more information, but we don't have that, unfortunately. The key point for injury prevention, again, is to stay within your habits and avoid drastic changes. If you are transitioning from a shoe, say that's more maximalist going to more minimalist, or the other way around, going from minimalist to more maximalist, you should be very gradual with that transition. And that means taking several weeks or even a few months to transition fully to that new shoe and in order to avoid injuries. That's the key point here for the transition. All right, so I think we've answered all the questions. So that's going to be it for the webinar. Again, thank you very much for attending. And I hope you learned a few things, and whether you decide to go with carbon plated shoes or other types of shoes for your next PB, at least now you have the information and you can make a better decision based on the science that we have. So thanks for attending, and see you around. Thank you.